And what I want us to look at is just one more thing of one more element. Okay, let's just go to it here. Okay, and this is visual design elements. And these are just some things that might help you. Okay, I've shown you vectors, I've shown you Gestalt, I've shown you those things. Okay, the rule of thirds. So this is taking the next step from that. And some of it we have gone over, but we have discussed a lot. We have discussed a lot things like orientation. So that should not be, which is the first one, and that should not be a big surprise because you have chosen one of these orientations for your poster. But in general, this is also going to help you as we start to think about the next project. And at the end of class, I'm going to talk about that for a minute. I don't want to confuse you too much because you still have to finish the poster, but a lot of you done with the poster. So maybe you want to start thinking about the next part. So of these additional, some elements of graphic design, of visual design. Okay, so orientation, I've talked about it, the notion of horizontal and vertical. So that's a simple building. We can see it actually is two different pictures. And that's why the people are inside. But we have horizontal, which is landscape, and vertical, which is portrait. Now in the next two, you're going to see a really significant difference in how the frame is oriented. So when we go here with the vertical portrait orientation, you really get a view of the mountain. I'm trying to think. It's Simatai. This part of the Great Wall is called Simatai, which is like Horseback Mountain. Yeah. Okay. So that's, you can sort of see the verticalness. It's drawing you up along it. When I in fact took a horizontal picture of the same thing. Okay, so that's that same gate, that same tower, halfway up the mountain, but making it horizontal. Because of the field of view, we've lost all that orientation, but basically, even if it was wider, we would still just have a sense of it's more stable. We wouldn't really have this sort of craggy drama that characterizes parts of the wall, because here, not only can we see the wall going up, but the frame itself supports that idea. The frame itself becomes part of the dynamic. When I talked about x-axis and y-axis, this takes something, it's vertical and dynamic, but by forcing it into a horizontal frame, it becomes more sedentary, a little more dull, more conservative. Even as I showed you in the tutorials and stuff, and me talking about it, the two pictures of 42nd Street, the sunset on 42nd Street, I think I was able to keep the landscape frame, the horizontal frame, because there was enough vertical in that sunset that it maintained its dynamic character of that vertical. So that's orientation. All right. And it's important how you decide to orient that frame. It's not just about what I've told you to do. It is about how does that frame affect the image inside, and how does it make it dynamic, interesting, all those sorts of things. So it's not just where it's going to be or page format or things like that. So those decisions need to be made. Another thing, and unfortunately I can't move these around, but there is something that I've noticed in a lot of the work, and I've mentioned it a number of times in talking about past student work, is edge magnetism. Now, what happens is the closer these objects get to the edge, then the edge draws them closer. So even here I've got, let me see. Whoops, I've got, all right, so here with symmetry, Okay, they're the same, they're just different colors. Okay, but if we think about when we move those closer to the edge, and I can't do it right now. No, I can't. Yes, let me do it. Let me make this interesting. So Command Shift 4. Just did a screenshot. All right, I'm going to need to turn on more things. I'm going to open up Photoshop, stop share, share screen, do the whole desktop. Okay, here it comes. Okay, I need to go with participants. We're up to 20, that's nice. And chat. So then I'm going to remember where these are. I think, wait. Computer's going slow. Okay, there it is. Actually, what I'm going to do is this. All right, so there it is. That's the image, and what I'm going to do is take my magic wand. I'm going to say Command X, Command V, so that's built a new layer. Can't see those now. I'm going to go there. Oh, wait, see, I have to move down a layer, so I do need to see my windows. Okay, so I will. Oops. Oh, no, I don't. Okay, I don't want to do that. I just want to grab the whole window and bring it over, and then have my tools, and I'll bring them over. All right, and I'll bring my participants back. All right, so I need to go back to that bottom layer. I'm going to go Command X, Command V. All right, so they're both in the same place and they're in two different layers. I'm going to go back to this bottom layer. I'm going to do this. I'm going to edit fill white. Okay, so now it's filled. And when I go to these two objects, I'm going to use the move tool. And so if I see in here, okay, and I have these guys, they're pretty symmetrical, right? They're symmetrical. So we can sort of think of them as wheels or headlights or a whole lot of things. And using the Gestalt principles, they really are drawn to one another. But what happens is, as they move closer to the edge starts to pull them away from one another. So where they felt, okay, where they felt very close together before, all right, and they're drawn, the magnetism between those objects is to each other. When they get close to the edge, the magnetism becomes the edge. So now this one here on this side is pretty much standing on its own, and this one is now totally drawn to that edge. So when I say you've put text or something that's too close to the edge, or you've put something too close to that edge, what happens is that demands full attention and it is pulling it. You can use this to make something look bigger. So if these were wheels or something, now what's happening is they're kind of pulling apart from one another. So rather than that, there's still, because of Gestalt, some symmetry between them, but they're being drawn away from one another. So I'm even going to do something else here so we can use it again. Okay, I'm going to duplicate the layer. Thank you. Okay, so now I have 3 balls I can mess with, and that's the top one. Okay. So, all right, so that's just looking at that part. So let's go back over. So that's the notion of edge magnetism. Then there's symmetry, which we've talked about, and I've kind of shown you there. That's very much was a part of Gestalt, that when 2 things are perfectly symmetrical, then they're related to one another, but also when things are symmetrical, when they're the same, they balance one another off. Now, there is also another way of balancing things, and that's called asymmetry. And that's where sort of the collective mass, those are not exactly the same. This sort of medium, smaller ball here in the middle is very balanced in the middle. And then we have large and small, and we have medium large and medium small. Because of their total mass, they can balance each other off. So if you're seeking balance within the frame, that balance can be created in a lot of different ways. So that is something to think about. And if I say your frame's not very balanced, then I'm not necessarily meaning perfectly balanced. I don't expect a perfectly symmetrical balance of objects either side, but you need to try to balance what's in the frame to make it a little bit comfortable, and then use vectors and other things to make it dynamic, to draw people's eye around the frame. Here, actually, asymmetrical balance is in fact more dynamic, and we end up looking all over the frame at those different objects and their relationships. So our eyes don't get sort of bored, our brain doesn't get bored. Even though it's a dull brown circles, the image itself can be fairly dynamic. Okay, so symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance. I've heard people say, well, if it's asymmetry, it's not balanced. Well, in visual design, in graphic design, it can be balanced asymmetrically because the objects are not exactly the same. So another way we create balance or we create interest is through contrast. And contrast exists in a lot of different ways. This is one of those interesting things of asymmetrical balance, well, where just by the distance and the size, okay, that smaller ball, that smaller circle is balancing off in attention the triangle of 3 circles. So it's like the 3 circles are very strong, but we can't help but look over to the right. We can't help but look over to the right. If you come in from the right and you see that, you're drawn to sort of the mass and the amount of color in the 3 circles in the group, the triangular 3. But then you always kind of come back because it totally contrasts. It's still a circle, it's still dark gray, but it is smaller. So why is it smaller? Why, that attracts our attention. Okay, there can be contrast of position. 4 circles, all the same, one in a completely different position, the other 3 in line. So we end up bouncing back and forth. So that contrast of position draws us to that lone circle. Okay, could be a contrast of color. All 4 circles of the same size, laid out in a very symmetrical way. The 4 in the center, but then when we have the 1 in red, now red itself is a warm color. Warm colors move forward. Cold colors, blue, we will talk more about this, recede. So red will always jump out, but here blue can be so dominant that it does grab our interest, but then this red circle definitely grabs our interest because of the contrast. And because of this, so that's color contrast. We can also have value contrast or brightness contrast. So these are more to the white side. So I think that that's tinted. So this is a black that has been heavily tinted with white, and this is less so. So it's a gray, it's not black. But the three being of the same and the one being different, it attracts interest to itself. Same would work if these three were that color. It's not really color, it's brightness. If these three, because it can work in if these had a color behind them, if they had a chroma, then we could operate with that as well. But the difference in brightness, tint or shade, there's a lot of different words for it, or value. All of those words are used, draws attention to itself. So that's contrast. Then you have contrast to shape. Only things different. See, part of it, what sometimes makes an interesting design is that the viewer looks and says, why? Why is that one square? Why is that one different? So when they ask that question, why, then they're going to spend more time with it. And hopefully your design somewhere won't be this generic, but your design will tell them why it should be different. Then we have contrast of direction. Basically, all the horizontal arrows are going the same way. I mean, they're horizontal. Then the one slightly diagonal draws attention. Oh, where's that one going? Because everybody else is going the same way. So that is a difference in direction. So things that contrast the direction. And then showing it in a photograph, there's a whole lot of features here. It's basically, the picture is this dull sort of brown gray of the wall, and then the mangy kind of green and the shrubbery. This was in March, so it would be early spring. So the colors haven't really come out yet. But then bam, this guy in a red jacket, tiny guy down here at the bottom, draws a whole lot of attention, okay, because of his total contrast. So even though he's very small and we're sort of looking up, it's some nice thirds. This is pretty close to an intersection point, the top horizon of the wall, and this is on that third. This comes down close to the left third in that neighborhood. But then bam, because of his colorfulness, we cannot help but look at him at the bottom. So those are sort of really basic elements. Then we can go to understanding some others. When we look at things in the distance, when we look at three-dimensionality, in fact, from single point perspective and things like that, those lines, what is a straight parallel line gets farther away from us, those lines converge. So here are some examples. So this one is not that long, but there is that sense of convergence as it goes away from us, as looking up that tower goes away from us. Here is Escher again, so it's drawn, but he takes it from almost seems backwards, but because it's looking down, the lines that are closer to us appear farther apart, or we don't really see it because what we see is perspective. And in actuality, as they get farther away from us, the lines get nearer to one another. So let's see, let me just kind of prove it. Okay, so you can, so if we, let me swap to this, and we can go straight line, and we can go straight line, I hope. And then if I bring those pictures, bring those lines up here, that shows you the distance. Oh, okay, I can't move it. All right, so I can't move it. But those lines, the one line is longer than the other one. Same thing here. You see the line of lights as they go away from us, they appear to get closer together. It's a parallel walkway. This Tiananmen is very much symmetrical in every way. So it is very conservative and cautious and all those things. So that is looking right down there. And I consciously stood very much in the middle to take that photo. And so as they go farther away, they get closer together. If they stayed straight, it would be a little bit odd. Here, even the station, the train kind of gets smaller as it's back in the tunnel. As we look down the tube, then you know why it's called the tube, the subway in London. The lines get narrower. We look up even this building. The sides of this building are in fact straight. There is an angle at the very top that you can't really see. But even here, this column, this part of it, the line comes together. Now, if we multiply that with this building, which in fact, it is a pyramid. It's called the Pyramid in San Francisco. It's the Transamerica building, but it in fact does narrow, which even makes it almost look infinite. And I have to say, standing under this building when clouds are rolling by, it really looks like the building is waving. It looks completely unstable because in a way, I mean, this kind of looks like the stairway to heaven when you look right up the side of it, because they do appear in the image. And when you capture it in two-dimensionally, the lines come together. Well, already they do. So it's an intensified effect. Next is altitude. And that is any object that is higher in the frame is thought to be farther away. There's ways to control that, but whatever the altitude is, if we go back over to this Photoshop, if I take these objects, and even though they're very similar to each other, okay, the assumption is because it's high in the frame, this one is farthest away. In Chinese art, there was some original Chinese art that in fact had no depth of field or anything, and they were highly vertical. And it was painted where everything looked perfectly the same, as though sort of the experience of distance would be the same, but it was intended that the things at the top of the painting would be understood as being farther away. So here's a little bit of an example of that. Now this, okay, has an inner frame in it. Okay, so the inner frame is closer to us, but when we look out the frame, not only do we have converging lines, but the farthest opening is really the highest specific thing in the frame. So it is farthest away. There's a whole bunch of the train line, there's a whole bunch of cues telling us this is farther away. But part of it is that within the frame, it looks farther away. There's some other factors here, but definitely the highest thing in the frame is that mountain, and it is the farthest away. I've shown you this picture before. Focus is not right, but this is definitely farthest away. Okay, and it ends up being highest in the frame. Same here. The roof part that is the farthest away, it appears to be this. Actually, I think it's this one that's lower, but then there's some other factors. But by it being high, we get the feeling that it is farther away. So altitude is one way to reinforce distance. It isn't always correct, it isn't always absolute, but it is one way to connect with people's brains and to put things that are at the top as farther away. I mean, we could, we could go back here and let me look at this for a second. I guess I shouldn't have closed this. Actually, in virtually all of the posters, Okay, definitely. If I take the New York poster, okay, the highest is the farthest away, and it's very high. So this is the sky in the distance beyond us. When we're down here, it's closer, and even this street, which is actually very, very flat physically. And I took this picture from above. It's actually from a relatively high angle. When you look down, the line, farther away gets higher. So New Jersey is the highest point here, and then the sky beyond that. If we looked at the empty quarter, we looked at trying to find. Okay, there we go. All right, the Liwa. Okay, very much highest in the frame is farther away. So these are two examples where that is definitely reinforced because there's not a lot of other clues that are telling us that information of what's farther away. So also when things overlap, that also gives you the sense that it's closer. Actually, I did this one on purpose where the blue frame is at the bottom, okay? And that makes it the farthest away because the green frame overlaps it and overlaps in front. The orange frame overlaps in the front. So actually I'm kind of fighting with overlap the notion of altitude. And if I go to Photoshop, what I can do is I can grab some of these guys. Okay, there he is down there. So let me grab it, and I'm going to change his color. So we'll just go, ooh, that's disgusting. No, I'm going to change that. Let's just, there we go. All right, so then I'm going to edit, fill, foreground color. Okay, so we've got green. Then I'm going to go here. Actually, let me go to this one. I'm going to select it. I'm going to edit fill. I'm going to make it black. Okay, and now I've got these three colors, and okay, if I take it simply right here, all right, you can see that these overlap in here, even though it's black, it comes forward because it overlaps the other frames. I could do the same thing that I sort of did with those squares. And this is fighting the notion of altitude with the closest one being the one on top, but I could flip it around and go and support the altitude notion this way. So how you put the text in, how you put the logo in, that's an overlapping function. So that, you got to think about what sort of images, what sort of depth it's creating, and that sort of thing. And even if we went back over here and I open, okay, and I open this, I mean, you saw some of the other ones I did. All I had to do was overlap any kind of sky. I could have put almost anything behind there. I mean, we have a sense these sort of written things jump off. By tying in with the color, this separates it a little less, but the overlapping frame here, but by the virtue of having this object in front, I could change the skies into some of these different ones. Let's just see if I have one available. Okay, there we go. All right, if I go to that one, okay, it's a completely different sky, but but just by overlapping it, and as long as some of the sizes are similar, it has the appearance that that sky is there. And I enhance the overlapping with this color by cutting holes there, but that could viably be the sky. And in fact, I put the sunset in the same place. I put the position of the sun in the same place to give a bit of that feeling. So overlapping is very important. So let's just look at some. Okay, so this is Escher again. There's a lot of Escher in here. Just with the drawing, this one's a little confusing because everything has similar detail. Okay, there's not really much of a change in focus, but it's the overlapping is the only real cue of the relationship between different parts of the picture. Here, you know that shaded building is the closest because it's overlapping the lighter building, and obviously this is all in the shade. But when these two buildings overlap, we know their exact relationship. And we have less of that relationship here where the frames aren't overlapping. And strangely enough, even with this super tall building, this kind of feels like the highest point in the photo, or the tree. And that's actually fighting because it's nearer. So, okay. This is Escher again. You have the leaves overlap the water and the reflection of some trees that we don't see. And then the fish is under the leaves, and it just makes an interesting kind of bizarre image. This is something designed to overlap. This is in New York. It's the Korean War Memorial, and it's meant to overlap the things behind it. And we can see through it to those things. We know that Thunderbolt, in spite of the lights, is closer than the Wonder wheel, not the Wonder wheel. So there's overlap there that tells us those relationships. And then here, even where the totem is in better focus, and this is actually the right focus, but it also overlaps with shows us it's totem, trees, then the large building behind it. So that's overlapping in operation. Then there's atmosphere. Things that are farther away will have atmosphere, and this either occurs naturally, like in this photograph, that the farther away things get, number one, the less, sorry, the dog just barked. Number one, the less saturated they are, but also they lose focus and definition. So here you see it just in the photograph. This is actually shot from the Great Wall. Here on the water, it's the same picture, a similar picture day. It was a hazy day, but there's always a natural haze that in the distance things become a little more gray. Here, Escher has done it. He has drawn in where you have reduced color saturation in the distance, and then detail diminishes. So you get a really strong three-dimensional feel from the atmosphere. Again, Escher, the concentration that he had to have to make these things happen and to do it correctly, intense, incredible. Okay, and even here, okay, this is actually where the focus is. So that's fighting against atmosphere a little bit, because this building is farther away. But that's what makes this front part so much clearer, that even though I did push the focus to the back building, its distance put it in the haze and actually gives it the sense of farther away. And maybe in this one, because of the distance between the two, it would be better to have concentrated the focus here. So when you take photographs, do a lot of different focus and depths of field. Okay, then the next thing obviously is shadows. Shadows and light. Shadows create depth, create 3D, create perception. If it's just flat like this, then we've got this window with the shadow here. So the shadows tell us we're inside the whole building. The shadows in this, if you wanted to know who Escher was, I'm sure everybody's seen this. the way he messes with our perception is how he throws shadows in a lot of different directions. And that's why which one's the up, the down, depending how the people are walking, but the one leads to the other, but it's shadows. It's the shadow and light that in fact drive us and push us to see things. Where here, he did a bizarre drawing, but he put the shadows in the same places. So the light source is in one place. And so this has a very realistic view because of the shadows, but then it's a very unrealistic subject. So that makes it more bizarre because largely because of the shadows, it's very real. Same thing with the lizards. When they become 3D, they have shadows and they have consistent shadows with the lizards marching on his desk. And even here, the shadows come toward us, but it tells us that the light is ahead, and it gives 3 dimensions that it's pushing forward toward the light source. Okay, then finally, something we use and something that helps us understand, because we don't always know the size of things. I could have a picture of Tiantan here. This is actually the Temple of the Prayer for Good Harvests. And with these 2 women here and the repeated shape, but with their umbrella, you can kind of get a sense of size. And with people, you get a sense of distance, size, 3-dimensionality, because people are known objects and we have known sense of size. Okay, where here, these could be buildings or whatever. And actually by now this shows, this says copyright 2006. I'm not sure you guys even know this variety of iPods, but there they are. But by showing them next to each other, you have a sense of their various sizes. I mean, this is, I'm trying to think if you do the tracking wheel, the generation right before this was the clicking wheel, which was first generation. So this is when they started making different sizes of iPods, and there's no iPhone yet. But because we have an iPhone, we might have a sense of size, but it would be good if there was some object without something to associate with. We don't necessarily know size. We look at this, there's cars, there's people. Man, that is actually that is a big poster. Okay, that is a huge poster. So we get this whole sense of this whole Disney corner going on here at the Amsterdam. And that's closer to where I'm trying to see it. Could even be 42nd Street. Okay. And here, because his self-portrait, we have the hand, we can see relative size because there's known objects. Here, he then messes with that, where we know the size of these objects. If we took that separately, like a bookcase, then if we took this city scene, but by juxtaposing the 2 together, it becomes really sort of confusing and becomes a strong optical experience, because knowledge, he messes with our knowledge of the space. Here, you look at Mao, you don't necessarily know how big this picture is. It a placemat? Is it a giant painting somewhere? Is it something on the back of a playing card? Is it a poster? I don't know what it is until we get farther away. And then we can start to have more references, like, something stopping us from moving forward. We have flags, and then we have a sense of the size of that poster. So knowledge, knowing how big things are. So this is just a handful more things to think about, and I might talk about it a little bit when I'm giving you critique. And I think knowing these things is going to help you do that. So let me right now go to here, close that, and we'll go here, and we'll go class attendance, and let's give class attendance a go. And actually what I'm first going to do